Oh, hello there, yes. Hurtling all our way through the weekend, and rain cometh. Yes, anyway, it only seems like a few days ago since I made a video about Miriam Gates, and, well, it's going to be the same thing, I'm afraid, because she's cropped up yet again. A nice paid article in the Daily Telegraph, which she's allowed to lay out her particular platform. Some might call it an ideology, but I wouldn't use words like that and just bandy them and throw them around. I'll leave that to Miriam. Anyway, it's another corker, which is chock full of disturbing allegations. And I'll come back to the word allegations towards the end about what's going on in schools. So I'm going to do the whole article, and I'm going to stop at various points and just question a very small amount of it. We can only win from a showdown with Stonewall. Instead of this timidity on trans guidance in schools, the Tories should relish the inevitable legal battle. Yes, says Miriam. Yes, you see, it's all about children. Or is it about winning the election? Oh, I think it's all about children, isn't it? Definitely all about children. So, Children's Commissioner, Dame Rachel D'Souza, has called on the government to publish its long-awaited gender guidance for schools. She told this paper that teachers and families are crying out for ministers to act. She's far from alone in her frustration. It's been well over a year since the government committed to producing this guidance, and parents, schools, campaigners and MPs are growing impatient. The need for guidance is not in doubt. Over the past decade, there's been an exponential rise in the number of children who are questioning their gender. The number of girls referred to the Tavistock Clinic rose by 5,000% between 2010 and 2022, and 80% of schools now have trans-identifying children. Almost half of secondary schools allow pupils to self-declare their gender without parental consent. Yes, so we have a new thing, and it's all bad. Just want to pick up on one particular word there, allow. I work with trans-identifying young people. I'm just wondering how I would not allow them to identify as such. If they do identify as such, should I punish them? Interesting idea. We'll put them in detention, shall we? That might stop them identifying that way. Is that logical? How would I not allow them? Answers on a postcard, if you will. I'm really curious about that, as to how the government might want to produce a law which prevents me from allowing a child to do that. Anyway, unsurprisingly, this has presented schools with challenges well outside their educational remit. When can a girl become a boy? Should boys use girls' toilets or take part in girls' sports? What are the legal, social, and indeed grammatical consequences if teachers refuse to use the pronouns they and them to refer to a girl who says she is neither male nor female? Yes, I think in answer to my question, or not in answer to my question. No doubt the majority of head teachers will want to navigate a sensible course, but sadly there are also teachers and third-party campaign groups actively promoting gender ideology to children. Just going to pause just a little bit there. Miriam, who are actively doing this? I want you to name some teachers that are doing this, because I'm not aware of anybody that is actively promoting anything except in your head. Okay? So I would like some names. And again, we'll come back to this notion about proof and evidence. There's no shortage of schools teaching that gender is a spectrum or proudly displaying the trans flag, as if it were in no way contentious to claim that you can change your gender as easily as you can change your clothes. Yes, okay then. So, schools are teaching that gender is a spectrum. Possibly there are lessons where that might be a thing. As to teaching that it definitely is, I don't think that that's entirely possible. Displaying the trans flag, yes, we do, because I don't want to shock Miriam, but if we have people in a school who are identifying as a particular thing, it would kind of make sense that we would do that. Let's say, I don't know, some vague notion that there's such a thing as gay students, and they might feel sort of happier about the notion of a pride flag in a school. I'm not quite sure how exactly displaying a pride flag means you can change your gender, though. Okay, if anybody can tell me how those two things are explicitly linked in the notion that I will show a child a pride flag and they will instantaneously, because you change your clothes, I don't know, let's say twice a day, decide that they are a different gender. If anyone can tell me how that works, I'm going to be intrigued by that. I mean, after all, Miriam used to be a science teacher, so she must be fully aware of some sort of causational thing there. I'm glad that she's not throwing language around willy-nilly here. Obviously, you wouldn't want to make stupid, flippant statements in a serious broadsheet like the Daily Telegraph. Let's move on. This ideology seems to have gripped every level of our education system. Not just yesterday, I had to complete a form to consent to my daughter's school flu vaccination. The drop-down blocks wanted me to know if my child was male, female, or non-binary. Right, okay, just to pause that there. Yes, this is very, very common because we live in a society where we've moved out of very rigid definitions because people no longer apply these rigid definitions to them. I don't want to shock Miriam, but I can recall back in the 80s when lots of people used to become very, very angry because there was a Ms box, right? There aren't any Mrs. There are only Mrs. and Mrs. Okay? You can't be MS. It was feminist, communist nonsense, and people used to get very angry about it. But obviously, Miriam is fine with such notions because we've moved on as a society. What she's not fine with is additional boxes. Additional boxes is communism or something. Yes. Anyway, gripped every level of our education system. A form. There we go. Failing to recognise a child's biological sex in schools is a safeguarding risk. No child should have to undress in front of a boy or vice versa, and certainly no child should be lied to or forced to lie about another child's sex. No child should be set on a pathway towards permanent sexual dysfunction and infertility by a school. Well, I agree with her about all of those things. Failing to recognise a child's biological sex is a safeguarding risk. That, as a standalone sentence, is absolutely meaningless. I would agree 100% with Miriam about people getting change and safety. I think Miriam knows full well as a teacher that will be pretty number one on the list of things that we would do in a school, and yet she's linking various things, which is a notion towards sexual dysfunction and infertility, and these are phrases that are very often bandied around by people like Miriam because it sounds very, very, very nasty and threatening and dangerous, and there's very little evidence to back up their claims in real terms. But Miriam, being a science teacher, knows this. We'll come back to evidence in just a little bit, obviously. While, of course, schools should have autonomy over localised policies such as uniform colour or the timings of the school day, the responsibility for setting legal safeguarding requirements lies with the Department of Education. It's therefore a dereliction of duty for the department to remain silent for so long in the face of such harm and confusion. Well, no, Miriam, I think it's a dereliction of duty, which the DOE have been, basically engaged in for about 15 years now across the board, to have, if they decide to rush through legislation which will make you happy, but an awful lot of other people extremely unhappy or suicidal, because we are dealing with children's mental health here, aren't we? And if you want to negate children's identity, that will be fine, but you will rush through a law that someone like me will have to implement. You won't, because you'll safely be sat at home typing articles that you get paid for by the Daily Telegraph. Nice little earner. Great stuff. The rest of us all have to deal with it, presumably by simply saying to a young person that no matter what their identity is or how they feel on the inside, that they're wrong. Might fit into a kind of evangelical view of the world whereby things are either good or bad. It is an indication of the failures of our human rights and equalities laws that the government has had to commission legal advice to determine whether it would be lawful to require schools to treat all children according to their biological sex. No, it isn't. It's just one of those things that it's very, very hard to actually legislate for, which is why we'll end up, courtesy of Miriam et al., with some very bad laws, almost inevitably. How exactly do you enforce these things that Miriam wants in schools? Again, how do you do it? There are no answers to that, and yet she's bitterly complaining that there aren't answers to it. Can't really make that one up. Government lawyers have previously cautioned that without changing the law, such guidance could amount to indirect discrimination under the Equality Act. But many experts, including those who have contributed to the recent Sex Matters report, are confident that such common sense rules would be lawful under existing legislation. Well, no, because that's the basic problem, isn't it? In the sense that it is contested. You know, you love those contested theory notions, and that's what it is. And you will notice the reference to very dodgy organisation there. This goes on all the time in these types of articles. People will make very, very ridiculous, contentious claims and back it up by ridiculous, contentious organisations who haven't published a bit of research at all. They've simply put out a polemic that the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Daily Star, the Daily Telegraph and the Daily everything else will simply reprint with no questions asked, and it becomes simply the canon of knowledge, doesn't it? Oh, well, that's that. Yeah, dodgy organisations said this, so it must be true. I don't think so. Whether the government publishes its guidance next week or next year will almost certainly be challenged in court by those who want children to be transitioned. Who wants children to be transitioned? I need names, Miriam, okay? If there are all of these teachers out there, who are they? Just one name. How's that? But rather than seeing this as a threat or something to be avoided, the government should see this as this inevitable legal battle as an opportunity. Ha! We're getting there. Firstly, it will force Stonewall and its allies to make their case public. And from what we've seen in Scotland and the Mermaids versus LGB Alliance case, these arguments don't stand up to scrutiny. Perhaps not actually citing the Mermaids case, might be one there. Anyway, moving on. Secondly, if the government were to lose a judicial review, the judgment should at least establish which elements of the law need to be changed and give Parliament the mandate to do it. And once again, she's used that phrase. She used this phrase in The Critic about a week ago. This idea that the government has a mandate to do any of this stuff. It doesn't. It wasn't in the 2019 manifesto, which she stood on. She has just decided magically that her views have a mandate from the public. We'll come back to the public in a very short period of time. And lastly, and importantly in the run-up to election, it might give voters hope that the Conservative Party is willing to stand up for conservative values. For everyone's sake, this guidance must be published now. Yes, we need Miriam to be an MP again. It's important. Anyway, just briefly, I think it's worthwhile just having a little bit of a discussion about evidence and ideology and, I don't know, evangelical Christians, because Miriam Gates used to belong to a church that used to, quite publicly, was well known for gay exorcisms, whereby they would pray the gay away and other such things. Really sort of nasty conversion therapy, which is regarded under international law as a form of torture. She claims that she didn't know that the church did this, which means that she's either doing that horrible breaking one of the Ten Commandments thing, which she wouldn't, obviously, or she's just a deeply unaware human being. I mean, she was, as an evangelical Christian, a science teacher, which presumably backs up the latter statement rather than the former. So we have this basic problem with her background in the sense that this isn't all particularly about safeguarding children. This is about all of our internal souls and her worldview, or ideology, which obviously is the word we're not allowed to use because Yeah, only she's allowed to use the word ideology. And it was really, really interesting. It's well worth reading this. That her local paper, The Star, has asked her for evidence on all of this stuff. And she hasn't got back to them. So it's very, very odd that this will be a vote winner for the Conservatives when her local newspapers can't get an answer out of her. But I'm sure all of that evidence is there. As I say, I'm sure she can give me names of teachers that are pushing trans ideology in schools. There must be a lot because she constantly bangs on about it in Parliament and is given a platform across the media to do so. So it must be true because Sex Matters say that it is. And my evangelical church are also convinced that these things are true because as an evangelical Christian, we know a lot about truth and proof and reality. Anyway, do have a lovely weekend. If you can.